All right. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to bring up our panelists. First, we have Maite Alberdi, who made The Mole Agent. Kirsten Johnson, who made Dick Johnson is Dead. And Bill and Turner Ross, who made the extraordinary Bloody Nose, Empty Pockets. All right, so this is very exciting. To begin with, I'm going to have you all set up your films. We're going to show a short clip so that if you haven't seen the film, you get a sense for what it's like. So why don't we start with you guys?
Turner, what is your film about?
I don't know what you selected, so you're going to have to...
Oh, it's Michael singing Crying.
Oh, okay. Are we saying what our film is, or what?
Yeah, say a little bit about it, which is sort of where I want to start. So part of the reason you're all on this panel and we're talking about this is that these are films that are technically documentaries, or kind of, or they're classified that way here, right? But the line between documentary and fiction is something that we seem to talk about all the time in our circles, and also that I think some of us are tired of talking about that, right? This feels like a false boundary. And we were just talking about how different it is in America, the way we think about this, as opposed to Chile or wherever. Could you begin by talking a little bit about what we were saying about that?
Yeah, I was saying that for me, it's super difficult generally to enter to the American market because the style and the form is completely established in one way to understand how the documentaries have to be in the style and also in the informational content in some way. So it was super amazing for me to have the opportunity to have this panel here because it's weird to have this kind of conversation in the US. And that's why I think that for me it's always difficult to approach to the US industry. And in some point I think that the documentary concept has been changing all the time until now. I don't know, if 20 years ago the industry sell us the Blair Witch Project as a fiction film that was like as a documentary and was real or not because it was a camera that was moving all the time. And now, like, documentaries are not cameras that are moving all the time. So we don't understand the documentary in that way. So we have a completely, for me, I feel that I have a freedom on the style that I can do wherever I want if I respect the truth. That's for me what a documentary is like. It's real or not, the story. And if the story is real, it's a documentary. And you are free to use all the resources that you want to use. And that is changing. For me, like now, okay, we say it's completely open, you are free, but I think that this year it's also being difficult because in the boom of fake news, you're super committed to say if it's documentary or not, because the people are afraid it's fake news. But in this kind of story, it's not relevant if it's fake news or not. So it depends on the content, I think.
Yeah. What about that line for all of you?
It's so interesting what you're saying. I mean, I think, one, we're talking about cinema language, and the question is, can the audience read the language that you are using, right? And so certain languages are coded, and we know what the codes mean. And then are we hiding from our audience or revealing to our audience what language we're speaking in? But in terms of the project that I did with my father, who is here, by the way, and live, what we were really interested in was how could we use cinema to play with time. And so I've been thinking about the way in which whenever I work with a camera, I am existing in the perpetual present. And that's sort of what dementia is the perpetual present. I think as dementia advances, you can, you still have access to your deep memories, your deep long-term memories, but you often have no access to your immediate, 10 seconds before, 1 minute before, kind of past. So what I was interested in was how could cinema be in dialogue with my father's dementia? So how could we be in the present with him? So we actually did things, with the speed of the camera, where we recorded him in extremely slow motion so that we could stretch out the time of the present. But I think of the invented or imagined deaths of my father as the future. And so that's the kind of language I was interested in playing with, so that these terms of, is this documentary or fiction, is not relevant. I was like, is this past or is this present? Or future?
Yeah, one thing I think we talked about was how it's, you're documenting something that hasn't happened yet, which is a funny way to think about it, but...
And yet it has, because, the dementia has already killed parts of my father.
Right. What about you guys working through this? How are you thinking about where that kind of fiction or artifice and truth lies?
It's not a conversation really that we have with each other, but I'm very happy to be a part of the conversation. I'm very happy that the nonfiction community has embraced us, and there are a lot of beautiful things going on there. I mean, these films, I can't wait to see these films. But for us, I think we're looking at it as cinema verite, cinema of life can be that without being documentary. And for us, we're looking into the world and trying to source when we have an idea, we go out into the world and try to find it, rather than sticking to a set or a script on page. I think for us, the really important thing is that we're finding something authentic and true humanistically, rather than didactically, and by whatever means we need to utilize to get there, that's how we're going to get there.
I don't think it's necessarily evident how your film came about, and I think it's worth describing that, particularly because, this struck me when I was thinking about all of your films, casting is actually a part of all of your films in different ways, but that's not something that maybe people think about, again, in connection with nonfiction. So can you talk about that process, and then we'll have each of you talk about that in turn?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think all our films are, we're casting always. This one a bit more so. The reveal behind the curtain is that this bar was while a real bar, also our closed set, and we cast everyone that's in that bar. But we arrived at that approach because that's how we thought, if we built this safe space where people felt like they could really be open, we could get a little closer to their truth, or their emotion, their emotion, inner life. But so yeah, it's all a bit of a lie.
And the people are kind of...
It's not a lie.
Not a lie.
They're kind of...
I was trying to work in the title of the panel.
They're playing versions of themselves, kind of, right?
Yeah.
In a sense, yeah.
Or just being themselves.
Or just
There's
being
being- yeah.
themselves,
To varying degrees, but there's also an actor in the room.
Mm-hmm.
He's also playing an actor. So yeah, I mean there are levels to that.
Yeah.
And both of you, you're such extraordinary camera people, and the way in which you search for images is in your films in such interesting ways. And just in that clip, the man who they're filming in the mirror does not know he's being filmed in that moment, right? His eye line is not taking in that the camera is filming him. And so, I think those of us who do camera work, we know that there are different relationships we have to the people we film when they know they are being filmed and when they don't know they are being filmed. So that the sort of idea of performance has to do with consciousness or awareness also.
So for your film then, there's a little bit of casting that goes on in there too.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I was really excited about with this film that felt like an extension of Camera Person in lots of ways. I mean, Camera Person for me was, can we reveal the person who is there with the camera? But for those of us who work on films, we know there are just so many unseen people who make a film come into being, and I was thinking a lot about stunt people who actually physically put their bodies on the line in service of this escapism that we all experience. So it's like a really weird thing where a person physically risks their own injury or death in order that we all might imagine someone else's death. So I was like, wow, the idea of casting stunt people became super exciting to me. But I learned really quickly that the stunt people, like, they were worlds unto themselves, and I realized, like, okay, I have to keep going back to my father. I don't want to get too far off of this choice, but they felt like, to me, this metaphor, I think a lot about how cinema keeps people alive for us. So the person who, in some ways, is most alive for me in cinema is Buster Keaton, who's like long dead, right? And sort of why is he so alive to us? And I think it's part of why it is that we experience his films on the level of our bodies, because he was physically risking his body in the making of his film, so that you experience it super viscerally. So I feel like that kind of risk that the stunt people take and that my father takes in this film, he's taking both the physical risk and the emotional risk of being in the film. So like your film and your film, you're documenting people's emotional states.
Going back, and I think that we were speaking that you don't make a casting of your main character, because we were speaking that maybe once per life you have the lucky to have like the perfect idea and the perfect characters, and we were thinking that maybe his father was the perfect character because only she can do the story of his father with that access and humor that you cannot make with another character that it's not part of your family. So, but I think that the casting is the same in fiction. If you don't have a good main character, the film it's not going to work. So in some way, you need to make a kind of casting. And in my previous film, I interviewed like 100 people until to find the main character, because I think that nobody's going to knock your door and say, okay, I'm a good character. So you must find this character. And in the mall, the castings is a scene of the film, because Romulo the detective need to have this mole, and I need to have my own character. So in some point, Romulo and me, we are looking for the same. He need a good detective, but finally it's not so good detective, but it's a super good character for me. So that it's on the film, and in some way, my job is the same like the job of the detective, that he waits until he have the proof to show to the client something, and I wait until to have the scene that I need for my film. So it's a kind of the same job, but yeah, it's everything, the main character. Yeah.
Okay.
I will just say, we were having this funny conversation. Basically, this film is the first time I've ever had an idea for a film. And my idea is, like, I'm going to make a film in which I kill my father over and over until he really dies. And it's like, that's an idea. All my other films that I've ever made are all like subjects or idea, or I'm exploring themes. And she was very nice, and she was like, you're lucky if you get one idea in a lifetime.
That's a pretty good idea. I mean,
Yeah. Well, I guess I'll keep going, which is to say, whenever I hear the term imagined futures, it makes me think of like science, right, and like science fiction and things like that. But I do think there's a sense in which all documentaries or nonfiction work or anything of this sort, certainly all of your films are experiments unto themselves, right? And there are challenges. So you go in kind of not knowing what's going to happen and just hoping you're going to get a movie out of it. And also you're bringing in a camera, and like a principle of a scientific experiment is that it's observed. The observation kind of changes what could happen, right? So what kinds of challenges do you have in making those films, particularly in these films, because of those principles? And also, is an experiment exciting to you or terrifying or all of the above?
Terrifying.
yeah, but that's what makes it good. If it wasn't scary, what would be the point? And to the idea of casting and finding the right people, I mean, for us, in the framework of what especially we were trying to do with this film, if you don't put the right people in that situation, create the right environment, and have done the imagining of that future scenario that you're going to put yourself in, it's unlikely that there's going to be any lightning in that bottle.
And even if you do, kill it with the casting, the wheels could have come off in a huge way.
Yeah, it was a massive experiment, and and very, very scary, but exhilarating, because then we're actively trying to figure something out that we don't know. So we're not yet smart enough to do the thing, but we will be by the time we've done it, hopefully.
What would it mean to have the wheels come off?
Oh, I mean, well, that just does, the experiment just doesn't click. Like if the folks don't take to it. Well, the wheels came off at one point. One of our cameras shattered because I set it
That
down
is
for 1
evidence of
second.
the wheels falling off. But yeah, I mean, I think in the sense that maybe it just wouldn't have worked. Maybe this experiment wouldn't have garnered the kind of naturalism, realism that we needed. Maybe the people wouldn't click together. Maybe they wouldn't get to that soulful space. Maybe there wouldn't be a grand act of catharsis. Maybe it would just be this stilted improv thing that we failed at.
But within the first 10 minutes, you could feel it working, and you just felt very alive because it was all happening around you, and there was just this great
Very
sense
exciting.
of energy. And
Thinking on our feet, and also camera person. I really appreciate. It's an honor to be recognized as a camera person. But yeah,
he's a dad, so dad jokes are his
par for the
specialty.
course. But it is the searching, and I know that's evident in our camera work. You can see that, but it is that searching. It's creating something that we can be so engaged in that it's an inquisitive act always.
I think I'm going to start making a name for mom jokes. But, I'm just thinking about, for me, camera person was this reclaiming of language because, I'm a tall person, and when I'm out with the camera, every time, every day, someone calls me a cameraman, because that was the language. So by making camera person, I was like, let's affirm some new language, and I think about this in terms of all the things we're all taught about cinema, and one of them is we're taught to fake it till you make it, and we're taught to pretend that we know how to do things. We're taught to pretend to know the future, script something, do a storyboard, and then those of us who are camera people, it's like, you can't try to imagine that lady's looking up at the boom mic, right? You can't imagine that. But all of us know when we're filming, it's like, you discover that or you look for that. And so one of the huge gifts for me in making this film was I cracked the code. I figured out for myself how to work on a fictional set the way that I work when I'm filming documentaries.
How does that work?
I can tell you. Okay, so the exciting part about it is that, that idea of the world exists and then we search in it. This is sort of like your film too, of in a way you found the place, right? And then you went into that world. But I realized, okay, I don't want to know anything in advance, which is how but I do need to create a world. But I can't have the world be completely imagined in advance by me because then it will be shortchanged, right? It won't be as complex as the real world. So the way we did it was, one, for me to truly trust all of the collaborators, including the producer. Maureen Ryan produced our fictional sections, and I kept saying, I don't want to know things. And she'd say, well, certain things you must know. You must know who's the choreographer we're going to work with. You must know whether we're going to film inside or outside. And I would say, I want to not know as long as possible. So she didn't know she didn't really understand what I was trying to do, but she trusted me enough to say, okay, I'm going to backdate decisions. So you have to decide the latest possible decision so this is we're trying to film this version of Heaven. Latest possible date to choose, are we going to be inside or outside? And I don't know. Okay, I'm going to make this choice. So that went all the way to the end. So then all I had were these elements. but I had all the elements assembled, all the people who knew how to put the elements into motion, and then I could feel what was happening in the moment. So the collaborators created the world in real time as we chose what to film.
That's
Love that.
super exciting.
That is
I know,
so
we can do
exciting.
it. We can all make fiction films.
And it,
Like, we totally have the skills for it, and we're really good at not knowing things,
Would this be a good
right?
Would this be a good
Yes.
moment to show the Halloween clip so people see how? Can we play the Halloween clip now? This is somewhat late in the film. Sorry, I keep springing things on them.
I feel like you guys have a ton of candy. I can only imagine how. Come, let me see. How much you got? Okay, we're crossing, guys. Crossing. More candy over there. We have to get Grandpa and let Marco go home. Let's stop in your apartment. Yeah. So basically, my thought back to the cinema language, the early discussion about cinema language is like, how can I move in and out of imagined language and found language? So we went trick-or-treating with my dad. He's lost his head. He's carrying it in his hands. It's just like my son picked that costume out for my dad without me saying anything. It's like, could there not be a more perfect costume for a man with dementia? And then it was fairly early on in my father's dementia, and he was getting tired, and so I said, we'll leave him at this friend's house, watching TV while we go out and trick or treat. And when I came back, he was sleeping in their bed, and he was completely confused about where he was. He was like, whose house am I at? And I just felt so terrible because I sort of thought I could still leave him alone, and I couldn't. So I started thinking about what was that place that he got left in, and how can we build and create that place? And then we had the costume from the real experience of trick-or-treating to bring into this false space. So that this sort of back and forth was early. I mean, it is the idea of the process of the film is that it's iterative. We learn from what we shoot in the documentary how to find what we shoot in the fiction and go back and forth.
Yeah, I would say that was also that is just so cool to hear you talk about, but to always be letting the thing inform the next thing. And I think that, that's probably a documentary quality, and so having the ability to set up a scenario and then respond to it and then let that feed the next thing, you do create a linear narrative trajectory, but there's a different way to approach it. That's just very cool.
And yeah, it's super important, the thing that you said before about we have ideas in these cases. We were not pitching topics, and that is super important because these are risky films in the development stage because we really didn't know what is going to happen with our setups in some points. So I'm really grateful of my producers and financiers that they believe in an idea, and in which point also do you pitch this idea? Because for me it was like, okay, I have to shoot a little to really show them that, okay, this is going to work and this is going to happen, because I didn't know before if the mall is going to be discovered at the second day. So I didn't have a film if he didn't make a good job inside that place. So yeah, we build like a kind of setup, if we have to call it setup, like an idea. Okay, I will go with this mall inside this place, and I will go also hide, making a light to this place to enter before him to don't be discovered, but I really don't know what is going to happen at the end. So we cannot say that we are making fiction or something not real, because we are completely open to everything that is happening, and sometimes the most exotic or eccentric things that happen when we were shooting are the most fake things, or the people, when we were editing, we have to take out a lot of scenes that everybody told us it's super fake, it's not real, but were completely real. But they were so perfect shooting and was so incredible the dialogue that everybody told us, nah, it's not. So I am not so creative to script that kind of dialogue and to have that idea, but reality surprise you when you are like open, and when you build like a strategy with your cameraman and with your team about how are you going to move.
Camera person.
My camera, okay, in my case, it's a camera.
It was actually a cameraman.
It was actually a cameraman, yeah.
Still a camera person.
Yeah. With your DOP, and when you're
Boom. Changing language, one word at a time.
So you make a strategy like how to shoot this, and I as a director, my goal in life, if you really don't know if it's a fiction or a documentary, it's a film. And I love films that have good cinematography and good sounds, and it's narrative, and I don't care about if it's reality or not. I work with reality because the reality surprised me, and I love to work with reality and not with actors. And that's why I make documentaries, but I go to the cinema to see films, and that is our goal at the end. And we need some strategies of film industry, like image, a nice image. So how we work for that, it's the director questions all the time, and that's what we are doing. So
one thing that I think about with all of these kinds of films, and also just generally where cinema feels like it is sometimes, is that there's we must be able to locate like the truth it's trying to convey. So as a critic, for instance, I find myself trying to answer the question, what is this about? And sometimes the movie tells you what it's about, and sometimes it really doesn't. And I tend to prefer the latter, because the former, but especially in documentary, but also in fiction to a degree, people have been, I think, trained to expect the movie to tell them what to think about it when they walk out. And all of these movies really resist that a lot. Can you talk about that? How do you think about that as creatives? Because from your end, you obviously have an idea you're trying to explore. You get done, then what happens? Are you looking for that?
That's the joy I find in film, is if you walk out of it and you're not sure what I'm supposed to be thinking, those are the movies that you're still thinking about a week later. Yeah. And allowing space for you to be a participant in it allows you to tell the story as well. And those are my favorite types of films.
Yeah, and we try not to create too much distance between audience and viewer, allowing some keys to be in there, but at the same time, beginning a conversation. I mean, I don't want to have a one-sided conversation. Here are some thoughts and ideas, and now you pick it up.
And it does seem like it would be funny for someone to walk into a bar and say, what is this bar about, right?
Yeah, what is this bar about? What are you about?
Somebody asked us to put a card in front of it yesterday. I was like, yeah,
What
we'll
is
go
this
back and
movie
re-edit the
about?
film and put a card in front.
Yeah. Well, it's all in there. There's about a lot of things. Life is about a lot of things, But.
Yeah, I mean, I always think of all of these things as relationships. right? And so what do you want to have happen in your relationships with people? You want back and forth, right? You want this active thing that you don't, and usually even whether you want it or not, sometimes things happen that you don't expect, and then everyone's rolling with that. And I think in this particular case, dementia is just, for those of us who have spent time with dementia, it is just like, what is going on? It's such an incredibly strange transformation of consciousness. I tell the story of my mother who had Alzheimer's. Her perception was really impacted, so that she would think a shadow on the ground was a hole, so she would be afraid to take a step. And there was this moment when we were riding in the car, and I was sitting really close to her, and my leg was against, right up next to her leg, and she started laughing, and I was like, "What are you laughing at?" And she started laughing uncontrollably, and then finally she sort of pulled herself together, and she was very conspiratorial, and she said, "I don't know how this happened, and I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it, but I've got a third leg."
That's quite a conundrum.
Right? So you know what I mean? And we can do that with cinema. We can have a third leg, right? And that's what's going on in the mind of someone who has dementia. That you're in a moment, you don't know where you are. Like, Marta, ask Dad. Dad, can you hear me? I can hear you. Where do you think you are right now? He's in heaven. He's listening to his daughter talk. He's in heaven, right? Nice answer. But I'm just actually looking at one of the camera people who worked on the film, John Bentham, and John is specialized in slow motion camera operating. So he understands things about time that I didn't understand at all. And yet I understand new things about time because of my father's relationship to time, that are really weird. And so together we could sort of create this language of, that feather floating there, that suspended feather, suddenly puts us into a different time-space dimension. And what does that make us feel about this liminal state that my father is in?
Well, for us was the same. We have a lot of character with dementia on the film, and you're completely open of what happened in this relation, and the emotional process that you live as a director, it's also the emotional travel that at the end you put in the narrative in some point. It's your journey and the character journey at the same time, I think.
Yeah. And I think we're talking about the relationship with audiences, right? There's nothing like not seeing it coming, which is what happens all the time with dementia, or even I would say with drunkenness, right? People are on a track, and then all of a sudden it's like, what? They just went onto a totally different track, and the not seeing it coming is so pleasurable. My other story with my mom is always I was stroking her hair, and she said, "Oh, has Kirsten gone?" And I said, "No, I'm right here." And she said, "Oh, that's so interesting because your touch was reminding me of you." That's what we want out of life and out of cinema, right? This poetry that comes out of nowhere.
Yeah. Because the title of this is Where the Truth Lies, I do want to bring in this thing that, we're living in a world where truth is under debate and how it's portrayed, and you were bringing this up, sort of how it's portrayed is something that people are constantly talking about, and we have very different ideas about what that means, but I think that filmmaking, words that sprung to mind watching movies like yours are not reality so much as surreality, right? They're surreal, they're maybe hyper real at times, and I'm wondering how you think about your responsibility as filmmakers to the truth, and also how creating those or making the conditions available for those kinds of hyper or surreal experiences might have something to do with helping people sort out their experience and relationship to the truth. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, we like to talk about that a lot, and you can look to history. I mean, Dada and Surrealism come out of a very confusing time, and people are responding to that in their art. And I mean, now is an incredible time to be a creator of things, because this is such a time of confusion and upheaval and miscommunication. And the filming of this took place right at the day after the 2016 election, because that was a very confusing time. And we said, now is the best possible moment for us to put people together and get the measure of America. And also, it's the best thing for us to do in this time. If the thing that we do is make things. And so that's where we can put our energies, and that's where hopefully we can speak to the situation that we're in.
I didn't know that you did that like right at that moment. That is so.
We didn't plan that.
Yeah.
It was the day after.
You didn't know what
the election
state you were going to
happened.
be
We're
in.
like, I guess we still got to do this.
Yeah.
Now is
Yeah.
a good
But
time to do
it
that.
actually ended up being wonderful, because no matter where you are in the political spectrum, people were feeling things, and so the emotions were a little closer to the surface on that particular day.
Absolutely.
So.
Yeah, no, that's really, really remarkable that you did that. I mean, I think that's, and that's that thing that we have of, oh, this isn't what I thought it was going to be, but I will persist.
And I think that we can not speak about the truth, because it is completely related to information also, and there is not one truth or one reality. Like, we are all here and we are all living the same reality, but we have different point of view of this same reality. So if all of us make a short film about this, I hope to have 100 different short films, because everybody live it in a different way. So of course that there's something that it's the same for everybody, yeah. But it's my point of view of that reality, and that it's already completely subjective in some points. So what are we taking of that reality, our experience of that reality, and our emotion, and the character emotion, and that's the true, or the thing that we are looking for at the end.
But I think I'm also thinking about means to an end, right? Like that you decided to hide from the people in the place that you are using the mole. Is that true? I don't know.
Hide to the people,
Do you
to
hide?
the place.
Yeah.
Yeah, we say to them, like, we want to make a documentary about this place, and we are going to show everything that it's happening there, the good things and the bad things.
Right.
And they allows us to enter, but they didn't know that we are going to be with a mole, and the mole enter weeks later, and they never know that he was our mole. And we showed the film to them like 2 weeks ago, and we say, okay, we put a mole inside your retirement home. But they love the film, because at the end, it's not about the bad things that happened, because nothing bad happened. It was more about the loneliness of the place and how do they feel. I'm telling all the film now, but it's okay. You have to live it.
Right.
But yeah, I didn't feel like we were lying, and we were afraid if really something bad happened, and we were going to show that. But when we finished the film, we were like completely comfortable, because it was not about that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But I mean, I think I'm saying hide, and yet we all hide. Like, nothing is completely revealed, and in some ways, like, I think that's what's really interesting when we try to get so simplistic about saying like ethics in filmmaking or lying or telling the truth. It's like, it's always so much more deeply complicated. I mean, obviously, if you went into the nursing home the way some people go into animal slaughterhouses, like attempting to expose what they perceive to be the abuses happening in that situation, that's a whole different power dynamic going on. And I think for me, as a camera person, I'm constantly being put in these situations where I think about my own relationship to power. And am I holding back information in the service of keeping power, sharing power, and often you don't know. Like, it's often after the fact that you find out. And I think that's the other thing I think about as a camera person is that you can't know actually what your power is or the other person's power is, but you need to know that power is in play. I always think about one of what I consider like one of my terrible mistakes as a human, being in Rwanda, and the light was fading, and we were making a film about how women were doing work that men had done during the genocide, and so many men were killed that the women were now doing the work. And so it was like beautiful light, and we were passing this sugarcane field, and I was like, oh my God, like, let's get in there. And we go in there, and we got the permission from the person who was running the place, and I ran out into the field because the light was about to fall, and set up, I actually had the camera on a tripod, weirdly, which when I think about it now, like I had plenty of time if I had it on a tripod. But I just started filming. I didn't ask any, so I literally came like a spaceship from outer space, landed in these women's field, and, of course, these women, what was so awesome, they just all started sucking their teeth and rolling their eyes and turned around. Just like, no, you don't get to film us. And it turned out, of course, they were working for some ridiculous, horrible wages in horrible conditions. They're like, no, you can't take my image, right? And I just remember just being horrified at myself, that in service of an image that was going to be so beautiful with this light, that I would be so deeply offensive to other humans. And that's when you realize you're in a relationship, right? And in that, you don't do that to people.
Yeah, exactly. And there is something that we always have to face as documentary filmmakers, that everybody told us okay, but if they have dementia or if they are handicapped, how they allows you to shoot them. And in some point, of course, that you're going to have all the release and the things that the lawyer asks for you, and you can have it, but only us know which kind of relationship do we have with the characters, and how comfortable do they really feel with the cameras. So at some point, that is the ethical responsibility that we have. It's if when you have characters with dementia, usually the family signs the release. But if you feel that the character it's not comfortable with the camera, you're not going to shoot it, even if because they understand what are you doing anyway. Maybe not exactly what is a film, as the lady said, okay, they are spying, they have dementia, they understand that there is a camera there. But you have an implied deal with them in some way.
Yeah, but I do feel like it's important to acknowledge that there are some moments that everyone's feeling discomfort, and you don't know whether that discomfort is okay or not okay, right? The thing we always say with my dad is he says, I would do anything for you, right? And in some ways I would do anything for him, but when you get into that territory, what does that really mean?
I do actually want to ask you guys about this too, because obviously people are getting...
Drinking is
Yeah.
That makes it
They're
very
agreeing to
interesting.
one thing and then entering conditions in which...
That is a huge act of trust.
Yeah.
And we brought people together who were willing to engage in an experiment with us. And they knew in advance what we were doing, and we all knew in advance that we didn't know what we were doing.
But even in those moments, and KJ, in the rush of making a film, a lot of times you start to get a shot in that field, and then your gut says, nope. Yeah.
Why
And
am
even
I
in our,
shooting?
even in our environment, there were moments where I was like, no. Yeah.
How are we going to use this, and why, and what does it say, and is this simply for a laugh or for entertainment value? And there's a scene in the film where a woman falls down, but the scene is in there not because the woman falls down, but because the woman gets picked up. The people come, and this is a family that they've created. But yeah, that was challenging and risky, and yeah, we had to, not only think on our feet, but then in editorializing the thing, really spend time with that and sort of meditate on it.
And we share so much time with the characters at the end that you really love your characters, so you are going to be the one that put the limits because you really love them. So until which point you can arrive, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what an incredible act for another human to share themselves with you for, for the thing that you are creating. And just the level of trust and beauty that requires is pretty incredible. I don't know if I could do it.
I mean, it's interesting to think about this, I think, in terms of terminology that we use, because I know I've talked to different people who they use the term subject, they use the term character, they use collaborator, different terms like that depending on what they're working on. But that does change how you view what you're doing, right? Depending on how you're thinking of them. Is that right?
I mean, sure, it's also just a little bit, the language is a little tricky. I don't know if there's a good word yet.
I mean, it's not like your father is the subject of the film, right?
No, yeah, my dad's my dad, right? Right, which is part of why the film is what it is. And I think one of the things I did learn from Camera Person, and that I didn't really understand before, was that the camera work is transmitting the nature of our feelings when we film, right? So the camera work is transmitting the love that you're talking about, or in your case, I don't know which one of you shot that moment, so good. But you just see what you're up to. You can see your brain working. You can feel your heart work. You're just like, I'm feeling you when I see you looking at that man in the mirror. And then, you feel your frustration when the guy who's thinking blocks him. You're like, I had the perfect shot that I was so curious about, right? And then you go away and you come back to it because you were clearly still curious. What am I going to see in that man's face as he's lost in this song, right?
And I'm human too, and I love that. And I love that when I see that in people's work, where you're understanding that this is a quest to discover and that there is some form of empathy here, some method of searching. And yeah, that's a wonderful compliment. Thank you.
So what would you say, because I've seen these headlines flying around, to an audience member who watched your film, enjoyed it, but comes to you and says something like, I feel like you lied to me?
The guy asked for
I
his money
did.
back then. Yeah.
And what does that mean for you? Is that a good response?
That language makes me mad.
Makes you mad?
It does make me mad because I'm not lying. We're not lying. That to lie is the intention is wrong. We are making a thing, and we are making a thing in a certain way to get at a greater truth. And I never ever. I mean, we are in the documentary category, so I understand that is gonna. And people have very fixed ideas of what that is, but at no point is it a lie, and at no point are we talking about it in that way. I mean, we have been very forthcoming about the way that we are making things right now. And
we put ourselves in the film, in this one in particular, to reinforce the fact that we're there and we're part of what's happening. So you see ourselves in the glass.
But the attempt is not a deception. I mean, if this was played as a fiction film, the conversation immediately changes. If it was a fiction film, no one would care if we shot it in Studio City. I mean, nobody asks those questions. You're just looking at the intention of the director, which is why I think it makes it interesting to play it in the documentary category, because you have very different conversations. Once you get past that one, you then start looking for what did they find, it's the words in their mouths, these incredible things that they say aren't words on a page. All these choices that they make aren't overtly directed by a director, and I think that's what you would assume if it plays as a straight fiction film. It's all very messy, but yeah, I'm not a liar.
I completely agree, and in some point, as I told before, the things that the people or the critics think that you are lying are not the ones that you make constructions in general. I read how this detective can have a Scarface poster in his office. he have it. Like, I really don't think he put a Scarface poster in a detective office. It's like, it's crazy. So the reality surprised me all the time, and that kind of surprise things are the one that feels like fake all the time, and that's why we love reality, because they surprise us, and when it's on the camera, it's amazing. And it's true, we are not trying to lie, we are trying to give a real experience to the audience. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like back to when I said to you, hide, right? Hide and lie, these words. But I do think, like, in some ways, I'm interested in provocation. Because I'm interested in pushing things and trying to really struggle with the things that I cannot understand. So I don't feel like with my film that I have some truth that I knew about this situation that I was trying to share. It was much more of like, I don't know what to do. Like, my father's getting dementia. I don't know what to do anymore. Like, I've already lived through this once with my mother. Like, I just knew I could not live through this period of time only in the sorrow of loss, and that I had to find some other way to engage. And also, I couldn't, I really don't want him to die. I really don't want him to disappear. So how do I put that into action in the film? What can I build? What can I do that puts into action that state of, like, I don't want this to happen. And yet, I'm sort of trafficking in the territory of my father's territory. My father was a psychiatrist, and so you're sort of in this Freudian territory of the uncanny, like, things are not as they seem. Things that happen are resonating with this strange sense of deja vu. All of the surrealism that you're talking about, I mean, it's so moving to me that you said, like, Dadaism came in response to, like, a time that did not make sense. And I'm just, like, it's so crazy great when you shot your film, because all of the emotion of that moment is in your film. And no one can control that, right?
Because I know we have filmmakers in the audience, I'm going to ask you one kind of practical question before we throw it out to the audience for some questions, which is, I have also talked to people who say this kind of a film is very difficult to get money for because you can't easily perhaps describe to people what it is you're trying to do, and they also maybe are looking for, as we've been saying, a film that, like, has a agenda or something that it's kind of a point, it's trying to make an advocacy point perhaps. So how did you, or didn't you do that, or to do that sort of generally in your work, or what advice would you give to someone who's interested in working in this area?
That is one of the most crazy-making things about our experience is I can tell you what we're going to attempt to do at the beginning, and it's probably going to sound a lot like the way I would describe it at the end. But the act of discovery is how we make our movies. So I can't give you the elevator pitch. I can't give you the selling points before we do it. And it would be really great if, in a brighter future, we could get people to come on board at the beginning rather than at the end. And occasionally we do find, the Sundance Institute has been really good about that over the years, but it is super hard for us to get early financing for what we do. In this case, we couldn't get anybody to do it, and so one of our oldest buddies said, you need to do this. You guys have been talking about this, and now is time, and how do we do it? What is it going to take? What is just the bare bones? How are we all going to get through this? And made it happen. So family and love, I guess.
And for us, like, I think that the pitch of the mall was super engaging for the first time, but we decided in which point we are going to go out to find financiers, because, as I said, it was risky. So only when we know that we can enter to the retirement home, we are allowed to ask, and we were there without rediscovery, we started taking financiers, and was in that point quick, or not quick, but we get the funds and the resources for that, yeah.
I would so give you money to make that movie.
Yeah.
I don't have any, but I would give it, right?
Thank you. But maybe it's to find the correct moment to pitch this kind of project. I think that it's the challenge with this project, that you cannot pitch it in a very early stage. You have to test the artistic idea with the camera. You have to show something that it's really working. I think that for you can be the same.
I mean, I think one of the really simple things to say to yourself is this movie execution dependent? Right? So there are some ideas that are just so good, you actually can't mess it up. Right? You know, what would be an example? Hands on a Hard Body. Have people seen that movie? Like, you know, it's a contest in Texas. People have to stand there with their hand on a truck. They get a break for 10 minutes.
It sells itself. Right?
Every, hour, hands on a hard body, right? So, and then the person who takes their hand off last wins the truck. Even if you did like the worst camera work in the world, you'd still love that movie. It's a great movie. That movie is not execution dependent. You say, I'm going to make a film about racism in the criminal justice system. That's an execution-dependent movie. You can make a really extraordinary movie about that, like Solitary, or you can make a terrible movie about that. I'm not going to name names. Right. But I think if you are making an execution-dependent project, that means you have to prove yourself through the execution. And so that it may be something, and that was absolutely the case with Camera Person. I didn't know what I was making. I just had questions about my life as a camera person. So we did not get money throughout the process, and could not make a trailer of it until after the movie was made, because we didn't know what it was. The beautiful thing was that with this film, for the first time in my life, and I will say, like, you always have these dreams of like, this is going to happen after you work really hard for years and years on a film, and it never happens. But this time it did happen to me. Priya Swaminathan, who was at Annapurna at the time, didn't know me. She called me cold and she said, I just want to talk to you about Camera Person. This amazing talk about Camera Person. And then she said, what are you working on next? And I told her, and she's like, I worked on Jackass. I want to work on this film. She's like, I want to get you money for this film, right? So for the first time in my life, I got money ahead of time. But what was hilarious and ironic, of course, classic, we had a budget. I imagined we're going to take my dad and like set him off on an ice floe. We're going to like blow him up. We're going to throw him out of buildings. And then, of course, my father couldn't do that. So I had to make a different movie.
Well, that seems like a great place to end then. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for being here.